Well, we told you we'd be in Indy, and we're here at the NFL Combine at the Indiana Convention Center as we just wrapped up day one of the NFL Combine, where we talked with Bengals head coach Zach Taylor and director of player personnel Duke Tobin. Welcome into another NFL Combine edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Muhammad Ahmad, Mike Neislick, and Andrew Gillis with you from the action in Indy. And guys, of course, we talked about this previewing the Combine. One of the biggest questions that would lead off the discussion would be, what is the future with Joe Burrow? That was the very first exact question, funny enough, but unsurprisingly, that was asked to Duke Tobin. And kind of paraphrasing what he said loosely is, it's in the works, it's not done yet, it's a good problem, but it gets done when it gets done. So clearly it's in the works. Clearly that's something that they're prioritizing, they're emphasizing it. And he said in his exact words, it's a good problem. Obviously that's really all we know, but at least it confirms what a lot of people know, which is that the Bengals are making Joe Burrow the priority. They've said they want to build around a guy like him. He called him a championship caliber player, and anything you do to win a championship is going to be built around Joe Burrow.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I said this Friday, I thought you were going to learn more from kind of what you were going to learn about T. Higgins, because with Joe Burrow, you knew that they were negotiating with him. You knew that it was going to get done. I mean, there was really never a doubt. Like, this isn't a Lamar Jackson situation. To me, the interesting part that you got from Duke Tobin was when he said that they kind of have a range of where they kind of view the contract. And, he said, he talked about negotiating quarterback contracts in the past. And, he's like, well, the numbers are higher, but, we kind of have an idea of where you're going to be at. So, he talked about you can kind of manipulate the numbers in the early years of the contract as you're, getting out of a rookie deal. You can mess with that a little bit, kind of make it easier on yourself. Or if you want to front load it, if you have the space, you can do that. So, to me, it sounds like progress is being made with Burrow. And I mean, honestly, like, it's news, but it isn't news, if that makes sense. I don't think anybody's really surprised by this. Everybody knew that it was coming, and I mean, you don't want to say it'll be done before the draft or before free agency.
I think if the framework's done, like he said, or they're operating under the assumption that there's a framework, it's probably closer than not, but at least gives you an operating. I think that years is kind of the big question. I'm curious to be, and then what the final range of that salary, obviously, how high over 50, was it go over 50? I was looking back, it was interesting to see that both the extensions he negotiated with Carson Palmer and
Andy
Dalton were 6 years, but Carson Palmer was 6 years on top of the 3 years he had left, so essentially a 9-year deal. Obviously much less dollars, but I think he talked about it with urgency, and that's kind of what you'd expect. Doesn't have to necessarily be the first thing that gets done, because like you said, if they have the framework in place, they can operate in free agency, knowing what they have available to spend on people. And so I think that was kind of the big news about Burrow, was that there is a framework, and we don't know what it is yet publicly, but that they have one, and they're kind of going into free agency knowing what they have to spend, or knowing what, if they have to restructure contracts, who they have to cut, things like that. Those decisions are all being made probably now because they have that in place.
And that's obviously something that we'll talk about here in a bit. And like you said, on top of, what is the salary range for Burrow, you think about how much is guaranteed, where does that compare to other quarterbacks who are making the big bucks, and how much of that is going to be spread out to where maybe it's a cap-friendly deal, to where maybe you want to keep guys like T. Higgins, who I wanted to jump into because, he was asked, Duke Tobin was about, T. Higgins and the notions that he may be traded, and he shut that down immediately and said, I'm not, in his own words, he said, I'm not concerned about helping other teams win. I want to help our team win. And he, word for word, he said that the notion of a trade, for T. Higgins and draft picks, comparable to what people have been saying about, what the Titans did with A.J. Brown. I mean, he called that ridiculous. So, he pretty much said no matter what happens, he's under contract for another year, even if for whatever reason an extension is not done. But he pretty much confirmed that. And I think it shows that although the main commitment is to Burrow, it sounds like there really is a commitment to want to actually extend T. Higgins, even though knowing you have Jamar Chase next year. And, of course, we've talked about Logan Wilson, which he didn't say much about that because, the theme you got from him was he can't predict the future. And I think that's one of the things he can't predict. And that goes with Higgins, too. But where do you guys kind of think, just based on hearing him talk, where do you think the priority is for Higgins after Burrow in terms of getting an extension?
Well, I viewed it a little differently. I viewed it that they have T. Higgins on their contract, and we'll see what happens. They didn't really outline much of a plan. They said we're going to approach him and talk to him a little bit, but they didn't sort of the urgency, I don't think, in extending him wasn't necessarily. They said they view him as a long-term piece, but I mean, if they make him wait another year, that will create another clash that a la Jesse Bates, where you're making him play out this rookie deal, and that could lead to some issues. So I think that there's another part of this that's still to come. I mean, obviously he shut down the trade option. I mean, they're gonna say he's on the team next year, and they're gonna view it as that's that. But I mean, there's another side to that, and that's what T. Higgins wants, and he could hold out for an extension, or try doing that, because I think he certainly wants to get this done now rather than later, and not play out that rookie deal, which for him is much less than a first round deal, obviously, because he wasn't a first round pick.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the moves that have kind of taken place with receivers across the years. I mean, you look at for example, AJ Brown gets traded, and everybody kind of looks at that trade and go, really, that's all you get for AJ Brown, and really, that's all you get for for Stephon Diggs. You can kind of Tyreek Hill. You can kind of go down the list of hey, this receiver was probably better than what the draft picks they got. The talk to me is centered around the fact that T. Higgins has 1 year left under that rookie deal. So if you're gonna do it, theoretically, if you were to want to maximize your assets, now would be the time to do it. But kind of reading between the lines there, obviously this goes without saying, but the Bengals are, I think, going to be pretty aggressive in trying to win the Super Bowl in 2023, because, I mean, again, you're looking at a situation where Joe Burrow is going to come up on a massive deal. Jamar Chase is going to get top-of-the-line receiver deal. And then you have T. Higgins. I understand kind of, thinking about, okay, well, how do we plan tomorrow's problems? How do we fix this? But at some point, you've got to win. Banners hang forever. And if you can win with T. Higgins, nobody's going to complain.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And, one of the things he was asked multiple times is, how do you anticipate planning for T. Higgins with Jamar Chase in mind? Because, like you said, Andrew, he's going to be eligible next year, Chase is, and we're almost certain that he's going to get the big dollars, especially with where the market's going to be reset for wide receivers getting paid. And so, the way he responded, Tobin, was, he's not overthinking it. He's focused on the here and now, and the here and now is winning the Super Bowl in 2023. And I don't know if you want to say something to that.
Yeah, so I was going to add the, one of the things that he mentioned about Burrow was, he did the typical general manager speak where you want to leave kind of all doors open. You want to leave all options open. He mentioned, maybe Burrow's the first thing we get done. Maybe it's the last thing we get done. And I think everybody kind of assumed that, okay, well, maybe you get Burrow done, and then you figure out where everything else. But I think the option that's interesting to me is the last option, because then if you are going to negotiate with the T. Higgins and a Logan Wilson, then it kind of allows you that space to kind of manipulate those first 2 years with the cap how you want to do it. Because if you're gonna get all those guys in, you're gonna be like, all right, we are definitely extending Logan Wilson. We're gonna get that deal done, and then we're going to figure out what the cap is with where we're at and how much space we have left. And then you can kind of move Burrow's first year, second year. You can move that up and down. So there's ways around this. And I think that's just kind of an interesting thing that I took away from that too, because, let's say you do want to extend T. Higgins long term. The merits of that can be debated, because if you're going to pay your two receivers $50 million and then Joe Burrow's make $45
But it will be interesting if they don't,
if
they don't sort of press it this year. If they say, well, we're okay with waiting, and T. Higgins say, well, I'm not okay with waiting.
Right.
That'll be the question. If he's okay with, not signing something now versus later. They said they'll talk to him, but if the two sides are too far apart, obviously that could create issues and sort of disrupt the plan. So that'll be all. And the interesting thing too is T. Higgins is represented by the same agent, I think.
As David Mulugeta.
Jesse Bates. So obviously that didn't go as planned for Jesse. So we'll kind of see.
Yeah, that is so important to know, Mike. That's a good point. It's David Mulugeta. He does represent both of them.
Well, and I was going to say, I'm pulling up the franchise tag figures right now. Just as kind of something to keep in mind, if you were to franchise tag a wide receiver right now, in 2023, it's $19.7 million.
Man,
so if you're going to do that next year with T. Higgins, that's going to go up. So, I'm sure there are people out there right now listening saying, well, maybe you can just franchise him. You don't have to commit long term. Well, if you're still going to do that, you're still going to have to pay a pretty penny to keep T. Higgins around in 2024.
Do you anticipate a possible option where, kind of like they did with Jonah Williams, maybe they do a fifth-year option?
Well, they can't.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
So he was a second-round pick. So
that's right.
That's why you see teams.
Same with Jesse.
That's why you see teams like it's weird because the 30th to the 31st pick doesn't really get a lot of value. There's not a great difference there. 32 to 33 is. 32 to 34 is because you get that extra year. You saw a couple of years ago, that's why the Ravens traded up to get Lamar at 32 because they wanted that extra year, which is kind of, ironically playing out in their favor. I guess you could say that right now. There's different ways around that. But, the fifth-year option for T is not an option. This is a contract
year. It's that close.
That's the thing. It's, that's the cutoff, and if nuts and bolts, what's the saying? I'm so tired. If nuts and bolts were candy and something, I don't know.
I don't even know.
Whatever it is.
You're digging deep in that one. I don't know.
But there's no fifth year option, and either way, T. Higgins is going to get paid in the 2024 season, but
he will. And, Taylor echoed what Tobin was saying in that, he's the one calling the plays. And so he finds it just silly that, other people would entertain this idea that they would trade him. And that's the takeaway we can all get from that. But you talk a lot about the word cap space. And we have had no shortage of talking about Joe Mixon with respect to cap space. Like you kind of said with the whole general manager speak, coach speak answer, they talked about the importance of Mixon, that he plays to the culture, what he provided from an efficiency standpoint, even when he was inconsistent in 2022. But, just going back to what Tobin said, and I think he actually does make a point here. I don't think this was particularly coach speak, manager speak, when he said that, he just doesn't know. They haven't really sat down and thought about, okay, can we afford Mixon? Sure, not that they can't afford him, but...
No, I think he was talking more about what they don't know is what people will offer their free agents. So, they don't know what the market is going to be for Jermaine Pratt, so they can't say if they can match his deal. I mean, they've talked about what to do with Joe Mixon. I mean, not that he'll tell us, but I think the uncertainty he was talking about was more what the market will bear for all these other positions.
That's a good point. Yeah, but with Mixon, though, I mean, like you said, Mike, the odds are they probably really have talked about it at this point. And, I mean, do you think the signs are starting to lean that way, that maybe, you think about the future and Mixon's not a part of it? Or do you think it's just too soon to tell from, what either Tobin or what Taylor were talking about? Well, he said that they were talking about, guys, there's opportunity to revisit deals, and I think that was sort of a he didn't say that specifically about Mixon, but I think that certainly he would be a candidate for that if he wants to stick on to restructure his deal a little bit, to offer some cap savings, because he's at the time of his career where the production's not going to probably go up. So I think that would be a way that the parties move forward together. Obviously, the way they spoke with him, they talked about him like he'll be part of the team. That's what I thought too,
and tried to pump him up. And I did ask about any disciplinary action being taken coming out of his court case that was dismissed, and they said they had no comment at this time.
Right.
So we'll see.
Yeah, I think you can make an interesting case. I know we've talked about it a lot, and a lot of fans have talked about it a lot in terms of kind of Joe Mixon being a cap casualty, but I guess maybe more than a cap casualty, somebody you cut just because you think you can do better. But I think you can make a really interesting case for drafting a third or fourth round running back this year. And you kind of map out the long-term outlook of this team. You've got Jamar Chase, you've got T. Higgins, you've got Tyler Boyd. They pretty much, as emphatically as they could, said that T. Higgins is going to be on the team in 2023. So if you're going to have those three receivers again, this tight end class is loaded. I think there's a really realistic scenario where the Bengals are like, okay, you know what? We're not going to run that ball. We're not going to run the ball that much anyway. So if we just add a guy who can give us maybe a change of pace, you can add something in the middle rounds, try and rely on those three guys throughout the season, and then next year, if you do lose T. Higgins, then you're going to have to start to run the ball a little bit more. Then is when you make the switch and you bring in a new running back, a guy who can be a full 3-down running back. So I think you can kind of game theory this, or however you want to say that, and kind of say that, like, look, if T. Higgins is on the roster, this team is going to be airing the ball out all the time. But if you lose a guy like that, you're going to need to find other players that can kind of pick up the slack, and that could be a time when you add a running back.
Stay with us on the podcast. As like Andrew said, we talk about the rest of the week as we're going to see running backs, we're going to see tight ends, and Duke Tobin and Zach Taylor talked about that. We'll tell you what they said and what that means moving forward this week. Much, much more to come right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast. And thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast as we are with you in Indy from the NFL Scouting Combine. We've been talking all about the biggest important takeaways from Duke Tobin and Zach Taylor, picking up where Andrew left off with the running backs and maybe planning for a future, potentially without T. Higgins. You know, running backs are a deep position in this class. We talked about what Daniel Jeremiah from NFL Network said about that, cornerbacks, and more importantly, the tight ends. You know, one thing I asked Duke Tobin was, I said, you guys haven't shied away from drafting those early tight ends, first, second round, and like we said, there's no shortage of that in this draft, and of course they've already seen the tape, they've already got guys in mind, but I said, what does it mean to have that with respect to another late first round pick? And the word he used was flexible. Like, it just makes them more flexible that, even if you don't get that Michael Mayer, you don't get a tight end, like, he talked a lot about the offensive line. Like, one thing he said is that you can never have enough offensive linemen. I know we talked a little bit about, kind of Lyle Collins and, his health and what the future's like for him. We talked about that many times going into this podcast, but, it just shows whether they want to add depth at tight end, depending on, of course, what happens to Hayden Hurst. You want to build, a tackle at that position. And I say build in the sense if you want to get someone and throw them in, not a project, because like we talked about on Monday, you're not really building a project. You want to win now. You want to get to a Super Bowl. He said that you're just a few plays, a few calls away from winning it or getting back to the big game. And so, he said, to kind of get to the point, they're focused on building internally versus externally. They had all those free agent signings last year on the offensive line. Now they're more focused on either getting guys in the draft or keeping what they have in-house. And of course, he acknowledged they can't keep everyone for top dollar value. But what does it say about maybe the vision of the Bengals that they want to focus building in-house versus getting other guys where they might have to otherwise?
Well, I think it kind of tells me that they're prepping for that world where Burrow is going to be extended, and you're going to have to start to play really, really young and thus really, really cheap players, because you're not going to be able to afford some high price free agents. And look what you did with the offensive line class last year. Obviously that you have a few hits there, but La'el Collins, like there's question of whether he's going to be on the team. Is he going to be healthy? Would they want to keep him? How do you kind of see that? I think you're kind of in a position where you don't want to commit to, I guess, 2 years in a row of a free agent class where, hey, maybe it's not going to work out, and then you kind of put yourself in some trouble. So, to me, that kind of says they're going to see what they have this year, because it is a good nucleus right now. I mean, you got a team that went to the Super Bowl and AFC title game in back-to-back years. We're a couple plays away from winning both of them. You can kind of make the case that good things are on the horizon for the Bengals, and they're here right now. But to me, that just kind of says that they are really, really. How do I want to phrase this? They are invested in kind of making this a youth movement, because eventually that youth movement's going to have to come, and sounds like it could be right now.
Well, I think the obvious answer is that it means that they drafted well in recent history, so
right,
they have
for
to pay money out to the players they drafted. And so, I mean, that's what it is. I mean, now you're stuck with, and I mean, really, I mean, Burrow's the quarterback, dedicating $50 million to the quarterback kind of forces some decisions too. So, I mean, I think that's what that means in terms of internal roster building.
Yeah, and going back to what you said, Andrew, like, you're preparing for a world where you're not going to have some of these guys that you've had for the last couple of years. Jesse Bates is at the top of the list, and Tobin said, like, that's a guy they want to keep. But whether it's him, and you say it's about Jermaine Pratt, like, if you can't keep those guys at top market dollar, then he said you just, as painful as it might be, as he put it, just got to do what you got to do and build elsewhere, either with free agency or with the draft, which I think they'd lean more towards anyway. But, to kind of wrap up with this, guys, this is somewhat day one. I mean, the first actual day we'll talk to prospects and players will be on Wednesday. I can't even keep track of the time because today's Tuesday. We have a sense of where the Bengals are headed just this offseason. And to look ahead at the combine, I mean, Andrew, you mentioned running backs. You mentioned, other position groups. What are some things that you guys are curious to know just about, like, maybe what some players are thinking? What do you guys want to just know and ask this coming days?
On Friday, the tight ends are going to talk. I think that's going to be kind of an interesting day. Obviously, Mayer's going to talk, local kid. That's a neat little story. But then obviously you've got Dalton Kincaid, Washington from Georgia. You've got some interesting stories there. I'm trying to think what, again, like Muhammad said, the days, I don't even know what day it is anymore. Tomorrow you get defensive line and linebackers. So, I mean, again, I don't know if linebacker's a need, but I think you could, I mean, outside of quarterback, hell, I mean, how many positions can you really talk yourself out of at 28? Like,
because you're so flexible.
Like, I don't know if it's the fact that they're picking at 28. I think it's that their roster, like, if Bijan or Jahmyr Gibbs is there at 28, like, you're thinking about that. If somehow, like, Jackson Smith and Jigba's there at 24, like, do you trade up? Like, I understand that might sound insane, but, like, Tyler Boyd ain't getting any younger. You might have to get, you might be letting go of T. Higgins in a year. Like, that would be, imagine that receiving core. Like, there's guys, I think, that really kind of open up everything. So I know this didn't really answer the question, but
no, I see what you're saying.
I'm curious. I think the unique thing about the rest of this week is that quarterback is obviously off the table. And then I don't know. And I mean, kicker's off the table. But like, even like, Zach Taylor said that competition's good for punters, so they're going to have a competition.
He stopped short of saying they would be interested in drafting a punter, though.
He did stop short.
He did. So, he caught himself.
Well, so it sounds like Mike is interested in talking to some of the punters who could go undrafted and see what their fits are in Cincinnati.
No, I think
I honestly would be personally.
The big question is just who, if you could find out who the Bengals are meeting with, just to get an idea of what guys they like. I mean, I think that's the question that you're trying to find for a lot of these players, in terms of their impact here, or what we're trying to find out. I think that's kind of the key thing.
Well, we are going to talk to the Bengals coordinators tomorrow, and that does include special teams coordinator / assistant head coach Darren Simmons. So maybe we'll see where his head is at, kind of on Drew Chrisman and what the future is for him, and really just that position as a whole. But stay with us, because again, we're going to have positional players. We're going to talk to the coordinators, like I mentioned, Lou Anarumo, Brian Callahan, get their thoughts on being back together for a 5th straight season, as hard as it is to believe, but that's exactly what it is. And, Taylor talked about that, and so we'll get their thoughts on that and much, much more that you need to know about the NFL Combine this week for the Bengals. But once again, for myself, Andrew Gillis, and Mike Nizick from Indy, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. We'll see you back here on Wednesday.